Welcome back to the 1,000 Recordings to Hear Before You Die, our latest Valkyries vlog series, and we are now on to episode number 5, looking at albums 13, 14 and 15. The same rules as always apply. 1 is that I listen to the album uninterrupted. 2 is that I listen to it without doing anything else, cover to cover. And 3 is that I don't read the expert analysis in the book until I have finished listening to the album. And without further ado, we will get cracking with album number 13. And this is by far the oldest recording we've covered so far. So here we go, album 13. For album 13, we are going back an awfully long way. So we're actually going back all the way to the 1600s and to the work of Johann Sebastian Bach, who lived from 1685 to 1750. Obviously a legendary composer. He was actually an amazing organist and was a specialist really in anything involving a keyboard, so harpsichord, piano, organ. And the cool fact about Johann Sebastian Bach was he was a royal court composer, made a royal court composer in 1736, and he obviously had an amazing career in classical music, and this won't be the only time we will see Bach during this vlog series. And today we will be looking at a reworking of one of his really classic pieces of music, and let's have a look at it. The album that we've drawn from the book this time with our magical musical randomizer is a recording of the Brandenburg Concertos, which are some of Bach's most famous works and are credited as some of the best Baroque, or Baroque and roll as I like to call it, compositions. And this particular album was released in January of 2003. To cover all 6 of the Brandenburg Concertos, it takes roughly an hour and a half, 99 minutes. And it's a version credited to Ronaldo Alessandrini. So let's give it a listen and see what we think about our first bit of classical music. Before I give a verdict on this recording of Bach's Brandenburg Concertos, I just want to talk a bit about my background in classical music. And it's not my strongest field. I don't think I'm the most qualified person to talk about the detail or the complexity of classical music, because it's not my specialism at all. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to go and watch classical concerts with my family. I've seen, Night at the Proms, as most British people do. So I do have a rough background in classical music, but I never listened to a whole album of Bach before in one go. In fact, the most I listen to classical music is classical playlists while I'm doing the job that actually makes me money, because I do not make any money from music or from vlogging. So yeah, a limited knowledge of classical music, so please take whatever I say with a pinch of salt and listen to Mr. Moon on this one. And now there are 6 Brandenburg Concertos. This album contains all 6. It's a long listen, an hour and a half, but I found it very relaxing. It's old-fashioned classical music. It's back in the 1700s and maybe a bit too old-fashioned for my tastes. If I'm honest, don't think I would listen to an hour and a half in one go ever, because I don't have the concentration span for it. Having said that, it's really relaxing, really nice listen, and Bach has a wonderful way with rhythms and melodies, and you can see why he was as loved and is loved as he is. And I have picked out 2 tracks which I particularly enjoyed. So Suite number 2 in F major, because it has amazing woodwind lines. It's really lively, yet it kind of peaks and troughs. It comes up and down. It's got really good changes of tempo to it, which I loved. And then Suite number 5 in D major, Allegro, because it's like really upbeat, really happy. It's got great harpsichord and strings running through it, which isn't a surprise really, given that Bach was a specialist in keyboard-based instruments. So those are my 2 picks, but I'm going to leave the proper analysis of this recording to our musical expert. So time for some intelligent analysis, and having read what our expert says in the book, it's kind of understandable to see why the Brandenburg Concertos fit into the 1,000 Recordings to Hear Before You Die. And before we get on to Bach himself, the reason this version was chosen, the Rinaldo Alessandrini version, was because apparently it's recorded in a beautiful venue in Rome for classical music, so you get really good acoustics, and also it was conducted in a way apparently which Bach would appreciate, so with vividness rather than with any form of slowness. It was recorded with a lot of energy, and I definitely got that listening through. In fact, I think I noted it on the 2 tracks I liked. They were really lively, really fun. In terms of the Brandenburg concertos themselves, it appears they were written in 1719 to 1720 for a German aristocrat, and the reason it's special is because apparently at the time choral music, religious music was the cool music. It's what everyone loved, and Bach wrote a lot of that, but when he wrote that, he was stuck in these religious formulaic methods and structures. And with the Brandenburg concertos, he was writing for small orchestra, which is kind of, like the punk of its day. And he basically messed around with structure and sound in ways he couldn't do on religious pieces. So it really was a revolution in terms of how the orchestras were playing, how he arranged the orchestras, and the sort of things he was doing, and also the sheer complexity of it. As I said, I can't really attest to it, but in the book he points out that Bach really plays around with chord structures and finds overly complex ways of doing things, which I think is what probably makes this set of concertos so excellent. So great job, Bach. Give it a listen. And in terms of the songs that our expert recommended, he's recommended Concerto number 3, second movement, and Concerto number 4 and number 5, cadenza. So feel free to give those a listen. Album number 14 of 1000, and we are going back to the 1960s again, so to the world of rockabilly and good old-fashioned rock and roll with legendary rocker Jerry Lee Lewis. And here's a few details about Jerry Lee Lewis. So he has been active since 1949 and is still theoretically active today. He has been nicknamed the Killer and is also known as rock and roll's first great wild man. The guy loved a party, and if we look here, you can see he has loads and loads of albums, so over 30 albums in that time period. He is in the Hall of Fame in Hollywood, Hall of Fame in Beale Street, Nashville, you name it, the guy's got the award. So he's been playing for a long, long time, and he's been making good old-fashioned rock and roll. And today we're going to take a look at a live recording from him back in the 60s. Hamburg by Jerry Lee Lewis. It was released in the summer of 1964, following Jerry Lee Lewis performing at the Star Club. Hamburg, obviously recorded there with a running time of 37 minutes and 2 seconds, and is reportedly seen as one of the greatest live rock and roll albums ever produced. So big shoes to fill going in, so I'll give it a listen and we'll see what we think on the other side. That was a real treat. Jerry Lee Lewis is a great performer, a true rock and roller on that piano, and you can just hear how much fun he's having as he's playing, and you get classics, like Great Balls of Fire and stuff like that, and the songs that you'll know, but all the tracks, to be honest with you, sound great. It's so upbeat and it's so fun. It's my kind of music. The guy is just rocking out and loving it. I'd thoroughly recommend giving it a listen, because if nothing else, it will make you smile, it will make you sing along, and it'll make you dance a little bit as well, because you can't stop yourself, because he's just rock and rolling too hard. And for me, I'm going to pick out very predictably Great Balls of Fire, just because no one else does a Great Balls of Fire quite the same as Jerry Lee Lewis. That little vocal intonation he uses so much is really cool. And then the last track on the album that I've got a whole lot of shaking going on, I thought was quite fun and possibly maybe a bit risque for the time. It's 1964, maybe. But yeah, so give it a listen. It's great. And now we'll see what our expert makes of this album. A little bit shocking reading the expert analysis on this one. It turns out the reason that this was such a shock to people, it was so good, is because Jerry Lee Lewis at this point was not popular in the United States. hence why he's playing in Hamburg, because he married his 13-year-old cousin. Yeah, not so keen on that one, Jerry Lee, but we're about music here, so we'll talk about music. But it would appear that his popularity was on the wane. He'd been on the same roster as Elvis at Sun Records, and he was an early star of rock and roll, and then obviously this had done his reputation a huge deal of damage, so no one expected much when he stepped up in Hamburg, and then gave the performance of a lifetime. And really, the reason this is on the 1,000 Greatest Recordings is just because he was so good. You know, he played the piano like a man possessed. His vocals are just so raw and powerful, and he's just fizzing with energy, and you can hear it as you listen. So I think great album. Maybe ignore the backstory a little bit, but really, really good. And in terms of tracks that our expert has picked, he has gone for Mean Woman Blues, What I'd Say, Hound Dog, guess a cover of Elvis, and Long Tall Sally. So feel free to give those a listen should you wish. Our 15th and final album of today is nothing if not eclectic. We're going to the Indian subcontinent and to have a look at the work of Ravi Shankar. Born in 1920, died in 2012, and was awarded India's highest honour in 1999. There it is. Some more stats on Ravi Shankar. So I counted, and it took a while, 74 live and studio albums. There was no point separating them this time because there were just as many live as studio, if not way more. So prolific career, influential on a global scale. So he was the man credited with bringing sitar music into the 20th century and for making it popular in countries outside of India. And he was also well known for bringing in different styles into traditional Hindustani music as well. So really, really influential guy. And as you can see from the picture I put behind, very good friends with George Harrison. Actually did a collaboration album together. And today we are going to be looking at an album of his from the 1950s, one of his early albums called Three Ragas. Three Ragas was released in 1956. It doesn't say exactly when. Now, we have a disparity here because on the catalogue it says it's 59 minutes, but the version I listened to on Spotify was 39:25. So I'm going to go with that. And it's essentially three long tracks, or they're each three ragas, basically. There's three tracks, and they will last quite a long time. So we'll give them a listen and see what we think. That was certainly an experience. I can't say I've ever listened to 39 minutes of sitar music anywhere outside of an Indian restaurant before. And if I'm honest, I wouldn't choose to listen to it every day. But one of the things I love about this vlog series for me personally is listening to a whole range of different music and expanding my musical horizons. And I have to say, on the whole, I would say that I enjoyed it. You know, there were bits of each raga that I wasn't so keen on, but essentially it's just some nice Indian percussion and a sitar. There's a beautiful simplicity to it. There are some really nice musical structures. He plays really crisply, really cleanly. He's obviously an expert at the sitar, and it's quite a nice listen. And do you know what? I think it probably does deserve to be in here because I don't regret listening to it. I didn't really struggle listening to it, and you know, now I can say I've listened to some sitar music that I otherwise wouldn't have. So if you're feeling adventurous and fancy a bit of world music, maybe give Ravi Shankar a go. And this album, I guess, is probably a nice way to do it with only three tracks. And because each track is so long, I'm not going to choose two from Ravi Shankar. I am just going to go for one of the three ragas, and that is going to be Morning Raga, which is the third one, because it's just got this really lovely change of tempo throughout. It's very calm, very soothing. You can almost close your eyes and just drift off and relax, which is so nice with music, you know, just occasionally just to close your eyes, relax and be taken away. So yeah, maybe spend 10 minutes with him and just see what you think of some sitar music. And that's our final album for episode 5. Reading through the expert opinion on this, and it's really cool. So basically, Mr. Moon is saying that this is potentially Ravi Shankar's greatest work of all those 70 odd albums. This one of his earliest recordings from 1956, his first long playing recording apparently is possibly the best because he's just at the top of his game. His improvisation, the way he plays, the rhythms and the sounds that he gets, he just doesn't parallel on anything else. And other people may disagree. If there are any big Ravi Shankar fans out there, let me know, because I know very little about Ravi Shankar and I'm going with what the book says. But essentially this is saying here that it's Ravi Shankar's best work, and there's a nice little quote from the Ravi Shankar at the end that just says, "When I hear this record, I feel the spirit of freshness and the vigour of youth in it." So obviously he looked back on it fondly as well, even many, many years later. And in terms of the tracks Mr. Moon's gone for, there's only three, but he's gone for Raga Jog and Raga Here Bhairav. And this is a slight difference in the versions that I listened to and the version that he listened to. But yeah, there we go. That's our first world music album from a man who was called the first world music superstar. And I was apprehensive, but I've been turned. It's quite a nice listen, and I think important to include some world music and stuff in these discussions as well, because you can tell he's a virtuoso on that sitar. He knows exactly what he's doing and he plays it so beautifully. And there ends our final album for episode 5. Thank you for joining me for episode 5 of the 1000 Recordings to Hear Before You Die series. And today we've had one of the more eclectic mixes, so some classical, some good old-fashioned rock and roll, and a little bit of world music with Ravi Shankar. And I hope you enjoyed it. I would recommend giving all those albums a listen depending on your mood. So if you want to chill out, try out the Bach. If you want to have a bit of a rock and roll, try the Jerry Lee Lewis. And if you feel like exploring some world music, try out Ravi Shankar and see what you think. It was a very interesting experience for me, and one I'm glad I listened to. And until next time, feel free to enjoy all our other content, and I'll see you for episode 6 of the 1000 Recordings to Hear Before You Die.